So for the record, I think that I just want to start by humbly saying I'm going to fail in what I'm going to attempt to do. And the reason is because I've only got you for 15 minutes, and I probably need you for 15 years. So, but what I want to do is I want to see if I can tease out some of the pieces of what I think is the puzzle for creating a world-class university. To do that, I want to do two things. I want to give an example of how we're not making it, and then I want to also look at, I want to invoke Maslow's hierarchy of needs and pretend that there's a hierarchy here. But in my system, it's just 3 needs. I don't have 5, so it'll be simple. So let me start by doing this. I'm gonna set up like a little exercise for you. So I've spent a bit of my life in Egypt, and I know Egyptians well, so if somebody's going to get really mad at me, actually, I'll just go ahead and add it. I'm also half Egyptian, so I have a stake in this. I know I look Swedish. Everybody tells me. It's okay. I'm a Swede. Let it go. I'm actually part Swedish. So this isn't me bashing Egypt, but somebody will take offense. And then what I want to do is invoke the UK, and I've spent a little bit of my life in the UK, and I know some people from the UK. So one thing I can say for certain is my life experience has been that Egyptians and Brits are the same in IQ. But I'm going to make this complicated. So in Egypt today, 15% of the population has a college degree. In the UK, 22%. So the UK is about 1.5 times, right? But they're in comparable ranges. These are similar numbers. But we have to remember that there's like 11 million or more Egyptians spread out across the world, and there's a huge portion of them that actually have college degrees. So when you're actually talking about the global population of Egyptians, it's about 20% have college degrees. So now 22, 20, they're really comparable numbers. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want to pretend you're 18, and I'm going to make an offer to you. This isn't a real offer, like don't come up afterwards and say, I want to take you up on your offer. And the offer is this. I'm going to send you to college for free in Egypt or the UK. You get to pick. You don't know which university you're going to end up in. It's just going to be one of them. You all pick the UK. But I just got through telling you that Egyptians are basically just as well educated as the English, and I even outed the fact that I think that IQ-wise they're the same. So why'd you pick the UK? That's what I wanted to see if I can tease out. There's a piece missing in Egypt that Egypt needs to figure out. Now, I told you I would invoke Maslow. Let me invoke Maslow. So when you think about it, one of the problems that the post-colonial states had after independence was they had needs that their universities would create the technical skills, the MDs, the lawyers, the bureaucrats, the engineers, at a really fast pace to try and catch up with the rest of the world. So I'm going to give you an example. The UAE. In 1971, at independence, by the way, my source is His Excellency Mohammed al-Qarqawi, so if I'm wrong about this, please have a conversation with him. At independence in 1971, there were 45 people living in the UAE with a college degree. 45. How do you run a state, even a small state, with 45 college degree people? You've got to do something, you've got to do it years ago. It's too late, right? You need to catch up. Because if no other reason, you just need to run a bureaucracy. So stage 1, the first need in the hierarchy of needs, is to create that skilled workforce. But if you're desperate to create that skilled workforce, you don't have the energy, the time, the resources to go after the other components. So another component is you need to create good citizens. Well, hopefully you did that in primary and secondary school, because by the time people are adults, it's too late. But you can kind of reinforce good citizenry in the universities, and you can take it one stage further. So it's my understanding, I'm a political scientist, so I kind of see the world through that lens. Let's be honest, the majority of the world for the last 6,500 years has believed that the best citizens are dumb and brainwashed. And this is actually, this talk I'm giving you today is part 2, because part 1 I did last World Government Summit, And I'm here to tell you the enemy of every state is an ignorant population. And the reason is because of the internet. It is too easy today to have uneducated people or people who are ignorant of a subject go to the internet and then spiral into some kind of bizarre conspiracy that misshapes their worldview and then creates people who don't quite understand the world they live in. So in other words, you could be a state that's achieving. You've provided amazing benefits to your public. But then the public, because it doesn't understand the true nature of their status in the state, walk away thinking, oh, I don't like this. I'll give you a recent example. The 2024 election in the United States. The bottom 50% in the United States had a real income growth during the Biden administration of 7%. In other words, after you take out inflation, their income actually grew by 7%. Kamala got 48%, Trump got 50%, so out of the bottom 50%. In other words, the Biden administration didn't get rewarded for the increased income that the bottom 50% was enjoying, and the number one reason the bottom 50% said they were voting for Trump was the economy. In the top 50%, the top half richest population in the United States, they had no meaningful change in their income. It was flat over the Biden administration. In other words, the Biden administration was very good for the bottom 50%, did nothing for the top 50%. It was 50-50. And then those who voted for Trump said the number one reason they were doing it was the economy. Well, if it's the economy, they've completely misread the economy. So how do you compensate for that? What you need is a well-educated public that can see through whatever nonsense is happening, especially in vulnerable electoral republics. But I totally think this is true for monarchies as well. The last thing you want is a public that isn't steeped in reality. And the way you fix that is you need a little bit of herd immunity, and the way you create that is by teaching philosophy, epistemology. You need to actually teach people critical thinking skills. Even if you're only teaching 20% of the population those critical thinking skills, that will give you a basis to infuse the reality into the public discourse. In other words, we need to rethink the dumb and brainwashed component here, especially in electoral republics, but I think it's global. There's an exception, obviously. If you're a tyranny and your goal is to plunder the population, keep them dumb and brainwashed, that's obviously better. You don't want them to know the truth. Having said that, I still actually haven't gotten to the important piece. The important piece is the third component. That one is the tricky one, because if you're a state starting off, you probably didn't have the resources to even think about it. So think about schools in the Middle East. I'm somewhat familiar with them. The majority of universities, think about parents in the Middle East. Think about the conversation you have when you go, I want to be a political scientist, with your Egyptian mother. And she's like, what? Why would you do that? You need to be a doctor or an engineer. You need to be something useful. Why are you doing something so useless? Well, what are you thinking? You won't be rich, you won't make money. And so that makes sense in a world where there aren't enough engineers and computer scientists and doctors. But that's the component that's missing between a world-class institution and a good university that's great at creating the technical skills for a state. Now, having said that, we know of some instances recently where, let's say, some rich states have thrown a bunch of money at hiring what they thought were high-prestige professors to sort of populate the university with these professors. There's a pitfall here, and it's a real danger. And that pitfall is the nature of academia, especially in the direction it's going in places like the United States. So I'll give you an example. There's a university in the United States, I won't say its name so that nobody gets upset, where in their political science department, the first semester you teach, which is, I didn't go to a school like that. I didn't teach actually until after I finished my comprehensive exams, so they were nice to me. First semester you teach, so now you have a problem. You're taking, for those of you who don't know what a PhD program, it's horrible. If you're thinking about getting into one, talk to me first. I'll try and talk you out of it. It's like boot camp, but 5 years. And they try to break your brain a little bit. So the first 2 semesters, it's usually take 9 semester hours unless it's psychology, and then you take 12. Those 9 semester hours are like 27 undergraduate semester hours. They give you more reading than can possibly be done. Like if you stayed up 24 hours a day, you wouldn't be able to keep up. So you have to learn coping mechanisms, right? Little tricks. So you do lots of summarizations, read the first and last paragraph in a chapter, and then summarize it. And you have to. There's no way. And they know this. They know they overloaded you. This is a test. Now, I don't know if it's a good test, but that's the test. So imagine now you're in this experience, and by the way, your first 2 semesters are obviously your most important because now you're going to establish your reputation, and we all know that once you have an established reputation, that's it. It's done. You're finished. You've never taught before. You're a first-year grad student, and you're now being given a class. You're probably reading the textbook, you're making the syllabus, you're making the tests. You have to choose one of 3 paths. Option 1 is you say, you know what? I'm here to go to grad school. I don't care about these students. It's a lecture classroom anyway, and the students probably don't like the material. I'm going to be the worst professor the world has ever seen, but I'm going to be a good student in the classroom, and I'm going to take care of myself. That person will make it. They'll be fine, because it doesn't matter what their ratings are at the end. It matters how they performed in their graduate work. Option 2 is you self-sacrifice and you say, you know what, I don't need to be great in school, I just need to be good for my students. I got into this job because I want to be a teacher, and how can I abandon my class? Those guys are going to fail. They'll never make it because their professors will think they're slackers and they're finished. They're done. Your third option is you try to do both. And even if you try to keep the quality high, you'll burn out and you'll crash and you'll fail out of the system. In other words, whether on purpose or by accident, the system weeds out the people who care and keeps the narcissists who only think about themselves. And that's one of the big pitfalls that you have to worry about when you create an institution, is institutions have the incentive to perpetuate the type of person that was part of the founding into the future. And that's what the professors in that graduate program have done, because that's the kind of person they are. In academia, the big pitfall is prestige is through research. Well, oftentimes researchers are researching and writing articles about topics that are inane and useless because they're just trying to get published. They don't care that their work is meaningless. They're just trying to get a line on a CV. And unfortunately, the way that a university gets its prestige is by the time that professor got cited, even if they were being cited in a negative way, like so-and-so is an idiot, oh my God, I can't believe they wrote that stupid article, they got a point. And so at the end of the day, there's this weird game that's being played that isn't useful for creating what I think is really necessary to make a world-class institution. You need to create an intellectual culture that goes beyond playing an inane game that gets you points on a scoreboard. And the way you do that, this is going to sound sad at some level, we already figured it out. We figured it out 200 years ago. It's the liberal arts program. What we do is, I'm going to invoke Rousseau. Rousseau wrote a book, Emile, and in the book he tried to say how you should educate a man. And then he goes, you know what? I should probably figure out how you should educate a woman, and her name is Sophie. So in Emile, Rousseau basically invokes Plato and says the way you educate a man is you figure out what they're good at, and then you focus on that guy and teach him that thing until he's an expert at that subject. But with Sophie, you teach her everything. And that gives her an advantage when she's looking for a mate, because if she knows how to play piano, even though she's not great at it, if she falls in love with a pianist, they have that in common. If she knows a little bit of math and she falls in love with a guy who's a mathematician, she has the ability to at least start a conversation with him. And of course, what we realized in the end was Rousseau was wrong. You need to do both to everybody. You want to give people an expertise, but you have to give them that well-rounded background, because that's what creates the culture So if I'm a political scientist and I'm talking to a physicist in my school and we have no basis in which to have a conversation, then how do we create an intellectual culture? How do we create connection between the different departments, especially in a world where the boundaries between subjects are increasingly blurred and where they may never have been real to begin with? Like, what's the difference between psychology and political science and economics? At some level, all of that is sort of fake. And the idea that one of the things I was always told is, you need to write a political science paper. And I'm like, yeah, but I need to put this psychology and this history into it. And they're like, no, we're political scientists. We don't do psychology and philosophy and history. And I'm like, wow, how can you know anything about humanity if you don't do these things? So we need to have an institution that has a space that creates those types of conversations. And the way you do that is by finding people who are humble enough to know it's okay to be wrong and willing to take the risks and be innovative. And that's what makes me happy about the UAE. I think the UAE has this really cool culture of innovation where it'll take those kinds of risks and is willing to kind of break the paradigm. Anyway, I'm way out of time, so thank you so much.